Hey, what's going on? Do you have an XM-18? And if you do you think the detent is too weak? If you think it's too weak, then just keep watching and I'll show you how to fix that yourself. But if you think the detent is perfect for you, I mean if you were lucky enough to get one with a strong detent, or if you prefer a weak detent, if that's your choice, then this video is not for you. But if you want to fix this yourself, you want to know how it's done, just keep watching and I'll show you. Now, one of the biggest controversies over the XM-18, besides price and customer service, is their detent. Their detents are known to be very weak, not just weak, but very weak. If you take, for example, this little Skyline, it has a very thin 3-inch blade and it flips open very nicely. You know, this little knife, you wouldn't expect it to have a strong detent. I mean, it's only well, the regular Skyline's only like 25 or 30 bucks, but this one's got a £2 3-ounce detent. And the XM-18, you know, you might pay $700–800 for it, maybe even more. Detent on this is only 9 ounces. This is £1 and 3 ounces more, and it's only a $25–30. Right, so you want to increase the detent on the XM-18. All you need is some tungsten carbide drill bits. I got these at Harbor Freight. It was like $6 a package and you get one of these, and they're all different sizes. If you only need to do one, this might get you by, and you'll need to get the one that has a 1/16 bit in it. So here's what these are. These are made of tungsten carbide. You get them at Harbor Freight for about $5 or $6, and you'll need to go through because each package actually has different sizes and it's not marked on the packaging, so you'll have to look real closely. See, this one worked. This is number 52 in inches. That is 0.0635 inches. That one would work. Now, these are actually drills. These are made for making jewelry and just drilling steel or just whatever you need to. They are made of tungsten carbide, so they are very durable. What you will not be able to use though is regular drill bits, regular stainless steel drill bits, high-speed steel, titanium nitride coated, cobalt. Any regular drill bit is not going to work because the steel on here is extremely hard. S35EN hardened to 62 HRC is extremely hard. I mean, it will not even make a scratch in the steel, literally, with a regular high-speed drill bit. So you do need tungsten carbide. Now these, you might be able to do one of these before it goes dull. These aren't the ideal type of drill bits for hardened steel, but they will work. The ideal thing though is to order some carbide inserts for a mill, which you got right here. The Kyocera brand is a good brand, and the size you need is a 1/16 inch. And decimal, that is 0.0625. So right here we've got a 2-flute end mill stub. See what that looks like up close. Just a regular ball end, tungsten carbide. These actually work on hardened steel very well. This is a 2-flute. 2-flute end mill, and this one will last a little longer if you can get one of these, a 1/16 2-flute ball nose stub end mill. This is all tin coated, so it has a coating on there that reduces friction and heat and extends tool life. This one I was actually able to get almost two of them before it goes dull. Now each one of these is about $10, so you'll be paying $10 for each detent you do. but well worth it. Alright, now that we've got our tools, let's go ahead and show you. You should already know how detent works. You've got a ball that's on the lock bar, and it sits in a hole on the blade. So as you look on the lock bar there's a little hole drilled. At the end of that hole on the hinder is a detent ball. Now in the closed position, you see that hole in the blade. The detent ball sits in that hole. Now that ball bearing is what holds the blade in place in the closed position. Now if you look at it from this angle here, you'll see that how far the detent ball is actually sitting in the hole. Now it looks to be a very, very small tip of the ball bearing is actually sitting inside the blade. Now that is why we have a weak detent. Now I'll show you an XM with a strong detent. If you look at the alright, there you can see the detent ball. As I close the blade, that ball sits in that hole. It's sitting in there. Maybe 75% of the ball bearing is inside the detent hole on the blade. Here is a factory unaltered Gen 4 3.5 inch. Let's close the blade and watch the detent ball fall in the hole. See, a very small portion of that ball sits in the blade. Now here is an altered detent, a modified detent. See how far that drops in there. Sits in much deeper. Now here's one with a very strong detent. This is the same as an 0560 detent. This one drops in about 90%. Almost, the titanium almost touches the blade, but does not quite. Now the 0560 though, the titanium actually does touch the blade in the closed position. That's why the 0560 has a very strong detent. See, there's no gap at all there. Just sits in there deep. And the 0560 has the strongest detent that I know of. Alright, now let's show, this is an unaltered 3.5 inch Gen 4. If you look at the detent hole that's drilled on the blade, and you look at the size of that compared to a modified detent. Now it's the exact same thing except for the hole is a little bigger. Now with the bigger hole, the ball bearing is allowed to sit deeper into the blade, therefore giving it a stronger detent. Now looking from the outside, you can't even really tell it's been modified. See, that's just a very tiny bit larger. Barely even noticeable to the eye, but that's the difference between a weak and strong detent. Now here's a factory unaltered Gen 4 slicer. This came from the factory with a larger detent hole, and it flips very well. Has a nice strong detent. That's just going by the detent, not actually trying to flip it open. Here's another Gen 4 Spanto that came from hinder with a strong detent. If you look at the detent hole, it is larger. See how far that ball bearing sits in there? Sits pretty deep. Now this one also flips very well. That's just going, not trying to flip it open, just the detent only. Compared to an unaltered one. Now if you just flip it, just going by the detent, that's all you get. So what you'll start with is a knife with a weak detent. All you got to do is take it apart. Let's go ahead and quickly take this one apart. It shouldn't take that long. I've had this one apart several times already. Take out the pivot screw. Now do not completely disassemble the knife, because you'll need to place the blade in several times approximately. You might get it right the first time, but in case you have to put it in several times to get it right. All you gotta do is slide out the blade. Usually the washers will stay in there where they need to be. You'll take your end mill, put it in a drill or a drill press or a Dremel, and all you're going to do is drill out this hole, the detent hole. Try to make it perfectly centered, although it's hard to not center it because it's a round ball end mill and it's already a pre-drilled hole. All you're doing is enlarging the hole on there one size bigger. Now do not use coolant or fluid or lubricant because to drill hardened steel, I guess it's just easier to do it dry, completely dry, make sure there's no oil or grease on there. And you might have to experiment with RPMs. I'm still experimenting with RPMs to find out what's the best RPM to save the end mill, so I don't go through as many as quickly. Now you don't have to drill all the way down. All you have to do is enlarge just the outer circumference of it. You don't have to go just all the way deep in there. It should take you about maybe 30 seconds. Just try to keep your pressure smooth and consistent, and just go down slowly, and you'll see some steel build up around there. When you see a little build up, just stop. Take and put the knife back together. Just press your lock bar over. Try to stick that in there carefully, not to mess with the washer alignment. When it's centered, just take your pivot, put it through to the other side. Go ahead and make sure the washer is not in the way of the pivot. Just press the pivot through. Go ahead and put your screw back in. Always screw this in and tighten it down to where the blade is centered. Always tighten this with the blade at a 90-degree angle, and I tighten it down to where I feel some resistance, and that's usually the sweet spot. Make sure the blade is centered, which it is. Make sure there's minimal movement side to side, and then you will have a knife that flips perfectly. This is going by just the detent strength alone. That's how well it flips. Now if you were to flip it like a normal knife, of course it's going to open all the way every time. Now you'll want to take it a little bit at a time. Just drill it a little bit, put it back in, test it out, see how well it flips, because you don't want to go too far, because you can increase the detent strength, but it's very hard to decrease it, because once you go too far, you're gonna have more issues. So here's a 3-inch that we increase the detent strength on, and it flips very well every time, even straight up. Now a good way to test your detent is also to point it straight up and flip it, see if it goes at least 90% open. That's just relying on the detent only. That's not trying to open it. If you wanted to open it, you just flip it like you would normally, and it will open straight up every time. Same with this one. Just going with the detent only. Should go up about 80-90%. Now if you want it to open all the way, just give it a good flick and it should open. So a knife with a weak detent, you're limited in options compared to a stronger detent. Now to open a weak detent, you either need to use wrist or learn the proper technique. If you're new to a hinder or a non-knife user picks this up and tries to use it, they're not going to have the technique down yet. Technique is push forward, push down, pull back quickly, and that will get it open. Now if you do that quickly, once with move, it will open. Still does take practice, but you'll get better at it. That's all you can do, is do that or use wrist. Now with a stronger detent, you got more options. If you want it to open quick, you just pull on the flipper like you usually do and it'll open every time. But if you want to open it slower, you can just slightly pull on the flipper and it'll go out like that. And slightly pull on the flipper. If If you still like to use wrist, you can do that. Next option is tighten down the pivot a little more. Something you can't do on a weak. So you can have a tighter pivot, less side to side blade play, and still use wrist to open it. But if you just pull on the flipper, it's not going to open all the way, like on a weak detent. Now you can use technique with this also, and flip it quickly, and it'll open. Now the 3-inch with a strong detent, it really flips open quickly because the blade is lighter and shorter, so it just flies out. Just barely pulling on is going to open all the way. If you don't like that, just tighten it up a little bit. Then it'll do that number right there. Now you guys use a little wrist or point it down at an angle. It'll open. Alright guys, if you have any questions or comments, please post them down below. I'd rather you guys do this yourself. If you really do not feel comfortable doing it, just send me an email. I will try to guide you through it. If you're still not comfortable, then you can send it in to me and I will do it for you. Alright guys, I appreciate you watching, and I'll talk to you later. Here's another test to test the detent strength. Hold it upside down, press the blade in, see how well it sucks in. Didn't really do anything on that one. Here's a modified detent. Sucks it in real nice. Here's a factory unaltered detent. Didn't even do anything, I had to press it all the way in. Here's a 2-pound detent. Sucks it in pretty good. Now here is a 3+ pound detent, pretty strong. Sucks in very aggressively.